Are you still here? We didn't think you were coming back. Picture something for a moment. Picture a woman who gives 9 years of her life to a marriage she believes in completely. 9 years of double shifts in a city that never learned her name. 9 years of 5 a.m. alarms, of eating dinner alone over a kitchen counter too exhausted to sit down, of watching her reflection in a hospital bathroom mirror and reminding herself what she is working toward. And every single month, without fail, she wires money home. For the mortgage. For his truck. For the business he promises is 6 months from taking off and then another 6 and then another. She does not complain. She does not drift. She does not let the loneliness talk her into anything she would regret. She stays completely, quietly faithful to a man she loves through a phone screen thousands of miles away, because she believes the distance is temporary and the love is permanent. Her name is Emily, and after 9 years, she is finally coming home. She doesn't call ahead. She wants it to be a surprise. She is smiling as the Uber turns onto her street. Then she sees the cars, the decorations, the guests in coordinated gold filling the front yard of her own home. At first she thinks maybe a neighbor, maybe a family gathering nobody mentioned. Then she sees him, Donald, standing at the entrance in a black tuxedo, shoulders back, face relaxed and bright. The expression of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to be. His hand resting naturally, easily, in the hand of a woman in a white beaded gown. And before Emily's mind can catch up with what her eyes are seeing, Donald's mother steps forward, looks directly at her, and says it without flinching. We didn't think you were coming back. That was Emily, standing on the sidewalk outside the home she paid for, suitcase at her feet, 9 years pressing down on her chest like something physical. And nobody standing in that yard had any idea what they had just walked into. But before we go into that day, there is something you need to understand about who Emily was before it happened. She is not a woman who unravels in public. She is not the kind of person who makes scenes while people watch and whisper. She is not someone who spent 9 years building a life without thinking carefully about what she would do if that life had been quietly taken apart behind her back. Long before she booked that return flight, Emily had already made certain calls. To her attorney, to her bank, to herself, the kind of honest, unflinching conversation a woman has alone at 2 a.m. when there is no one left to perform for. Because 9 years of distance does not mean 9 years of blindness. And what Donald did not know, what none of them knew, was that Emily had come home prepared. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened that afternoon, you need to understand the woman who lived it. Emily was not the kind of woman who made decisions carelessly. Every choice she had ever made in her life had a reason behind it, a calculation, a vision of what came next. The women in her family called it stubbornness. Donald called it one of the things he loved most about her. She called it survival. And when she made the decision to take the nursing contract abroad, she did not make it alone, and she did not make it lightly. She made it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night in October, 9 years ago, with Donald sitting across from her, and a future spread out between them like something they could both reach out and touch. She remembers that night with the kind of clarity that only the most important nights earn. The kitchen light was slightly too bright. Donald had his sleeves rolled up. There was coffee going cold in 2 mugs neither of them were drinking. She had printed out the contract offer and laid it flat on the table between them, and they had gone through it line by line, the salary, the duration, the renewal options, the numbers that made everything they had been dreaming about suddenly possible. A real down payment, a real house, a logistics business that didn't have to start on borrowed money and desperate hope. Donald had looked at the figures for a long time without speaking. Then he had looked up at her and said, quietly, that he believed in them enough to wait. She had reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. She believed in them too. That was never the question. She left 3 weeks later with 1 large suitcase, a carry-on, and the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. The plan was 2 years. 2 years, enough saved, then home for good. But contracts extended. Opportunities came. The mortgage needed more cushion than they had anticipated. The logistics business needed startup capital that kept growing. And Emily, being Emily, kept saying yes to the next shift and no to the version of herself that wanted to stop and rest, because the finish line kept moving and she refused to stop running toward it. 9 years. That is what 2 became. She sent money home every single month without exception. Not when she had extra. Every month, regardless of what her own account looked like after rent and food and the occasional phone call to her mother. She funded the mortgage payments on a house she had not slept in. She wired the down payment for the SUV Donald said he needed for client meetings. She sent the seed capital for the logistics company in 3 separate transfers, each one representing a week of double shifts and skip days off. She researched kitchen appliances from her studio apartment at midnight and ordered them to be delivered to a home she had not cooked a meal in for years. She chose the living room furniture from a catalog, imagined where each piece would sit, and paid for it to be assembled by people she would never meet. She was building a home from the outside. She was building a life she intended to walk back into. Every decision she made, every dollar she sent, every night she chose duty over comfort was a brick she was laying toward the moment she would finally come home and live in the thing she had built. She was not naive about distance. She had watched enough marriages dissolve from the outside to know that absence created space and space invited doubt and doubt, left unattended, became something far more dangerous. She called Donald every evening when her shift ended. She remembered the details, his sister's birthday, the name of the business contact he had mentioned 3 weeks ago, the way he liked his coffee, the side of the bed he refused to give up even when they argued. She showed up, faithfully, through every phone screen and time zone and 12-hour shift, because she believed that attention was its own kind of presence. That love, maintained carefully enough, could survive anything. She believed that right up until she didn't. The call that changed everything did not come from Donald. It came from her friend Karen, who mentioned it almost in passing, the way people mention things they assume you already know. A comment about how nice it was that Donald had kept himself busy. A pause. A careful backtrack. An awkward silence that told Emily everything Karen's words had not. She did not push Karen for details that night. She sat with the silence instead, turning it over, examining it the way she had learned to examine things that frightened her. Slowly, thoroughly, without looking away. That night she opened her laptop. She looked at 9 years of wire transfer confirmations, organized by date in a folder she had kept without ever fully understanding why. Then she opened a new tab and searched for the best family law attorney in her home city. She read 3 websites. She made 1 call the following morning. And 2 weeks later, without telling her sister, without telling Karen, without sending Donald so much as a hint, Emily booked a 1-way flight home. She told no one, not a single person, because something deep and quiet inside her already knew that the element of surprise was no longer just a gift. It was a strategy. She had imagined this flight so many times that when it finally happened, it felt almost unreal. Not like a dream. Emily did not deal in dreams, but like a plan finally executing after years of preparation. She had a window seat. She had asked for it specifically. She wanted to see the city come up to meet her, wanted to watch the skyline emerge from the clouds the way it does when a plane descends and the world below suddenly stops being abstract and becomes real again, becomes home. She did not sleep on the flight. She had thought she might. 9 years of exhaustion had a way of catching up with a person the moment they finally stopped moving, and she had not truly stopped moving in longer than she could honestly remember. But sleep would not come. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her headphones around her neck, not in her ears, and she watched the darkness outside the window slowly change as the hours passed. She thought about Donald. She thought about the kitchen table. She thought about the contract she had signed 9 years ago and the invisible contract she had signed that same night, the one between 2 people who believed in each other enough to try something hard. She thought about Karen's pause on the phone. She thought about the attorney she had spoken to twice now, a sharp, unhurried woman named Patricia who had listened to everything Emily said without interrupting and then told her, calmly and precisely, exactly what her options were. She thought about the folder on her laptop, 9 years of transfer confirmations, mortgage statements, business seed records, appliance receipts, all of it organized and saved and backed up in 2 separate places because Patricia had told her to treat every document like it was the most important piece of evidence she owned. She thought about all of it, and then she put it somewhere quiet inside her and looked back out the window. The city appeared below like something waking up. She pressed her fingers lightly against the glass. She had not let herself feel it fully until this moment. The missing of it, the specific physical ache of having been away from a place that was yours. The streets looked smaller from above than she remembered. Everything did. But it was hers. It had always been hers. And she was coming back to collect every piece of it. The airport was busy in the way airports always are at midday. Purposeful chaos. Everyone moving toward something. Emily collected her bags from the carousel with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done it hundreds of times. She did not rush. Rushing was for people who were uncertain. She walked through the arrivals hall and out into the open air and stood for a moment in the light, just breathing. The smell of the city hit her before anything else. It is always the smell that brings a place back first, before the sounds and the sights and the feelings catch up. She ordered the Uber and waited. When the car arrived, the driver was a talkative man in his 50s who asked where she was coming from and seemed genuinely pleased when she told him. He had a daughter who wanted to study abroad, he said. Did she think it was worth it? She looked at him in the rearview mirror for a moment before answering. She said that it depended entirely on what you were going home to. He nodded seriously, as though she had said something profound, and she turned back to the window. The streets came back to her one at a time. She recognized a diner on the corner of a road she used to drive every morning. A pharmacy that had been there since she was a child. A park where she and Donald had sat on a Sunday afternoon the month before she left. Not talking about much, just existing together in the particular ease of two people who had not yet had anything to lose. She had not thought about that afternoon in years. It arrived now, uninvited and vivid, and she let it come and let it pass. Her headphones stayed around her neck the entire ride. She did not want anything between her and this. Every block that passed was a block she had paid for in time and distance and deliberate sacrifice, and she wanted to feel each one. The driver turned onto her street and Emily sat forward slightly in her seat. The way a person does when something they have been waiting for is finally about to arrive. Then she heard it. Music. Live, full, deep music coming from somewhere ahead. The kind that does not stay inside walls. The kind that spills into the street and announces itself to everyone within a half-mile radius. Her eyes moved past the driver's headrest toward the windshield and she saw the lights first. Warm, strung lights draped across something large. Then the cars. More cars than her street had ever held on an ordinary day. Lined bumper to bumper along both curbs all the way to the corner. Her hand tightened slowly in her lap. The driver slowed without being asked, sensing something had shifted in the car. Emily stared through the windshield at the house at the end of the block. Her house. And something was happening inside it that she had not been told about. Something that had clearly taken a great deal of planning. Something that had required coordination and budget and guest lists, and decisions made by someone who had never once thought to pick up the phone and call her. Her mouth went dry. She told the driver to keep going. Slowly. The car moved slowly and Emily was grateful for it. She needed the extra seconds. She needed her eyes to have time to process what her mind was refusing to accept. The decorations were everywhere. Strung lights draped from the oak tree she had planted in the front yard the year before she left. The one she had asked the neighbor to water through its first summer because young trees needed consistency to survive. It had grown. It was full and tall now and someone had wrapped it in warm light without once thinking about the woman who had put it in the ground. Gold and white ribbons lined the front path. Floral arrangements she had never seen, never chosen, never approved stood at the entrance in tall vases that cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. The yard she had paid a landscaping company to design and maintain looked immaculate and festive and completely, utterly foreign to her. Caterers in matching white uniforms moved in and out of her front door with the efficiency of people on a schedule. Guests in coordinated gold lace filled the yard, the porch, the driveway, spilling onto the sidewalk in clusters of conversation and laughter and the particular ease of people who had been celebrating long enough to feel completely at home. Someone had chosen that fabric. Someone had sent out a color code. Someone had planned this day down to the last detail over weeks or months. And not one moment of that planning had included a phone call to Emily. She counted the cars without meaning to. An old habit. her mind reaching for something concrete to hold while everything else dissolved. Then she saw him. Donald was standing near the entrance to the front porch, and the sight of him hit her somewhere below the ribs. Not like a punch, but like a door swinging open onto a room she had not prepared herself to enter. He was in a black tuxedo, fitted and deliberate, the kind of clothing a man wears when he wants the world to see him at his best. His head was slightly raised. His shoulders were back. His face carried the expression of a man who had arrived exactly where he had intended to be. Relaxed, certain, completely at ease in his own moment. 9 years of video calls had kept his face familiar to her, but this version of him was different. This was not the man who called her on Tuesday evenings and asked about her shift. This was a man she did not fully recognize, in that gap, that small, terrible distance between the Donald she knew and the Donald standing in her yard, was the most frightening thing she had seen in 9 years. His hand was not in his pocket. It was not raised in greeting. It was resting easily, naturally, with the comfort of something practiced and settled, in the hand of the woman beside him. The woman was in white, a beaded bridal gown that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was swept up and pinned with something delicate at the crown. Her makeup was the kind that takes hours and transforms a woman into a version of herself built specifically for a day like this. She was beautiful. Emily registered that plainly, without drama, the way you register any fact that is simply and undeniably true. She was young. She was radiant. And she was standing in Emily's yard in a wedding gown holding Emily's husband's hand as though she had every right in the world to be there, because someone had told her she did. Emily's voice, when she finally spoke, was very quiet. She told the driver to stop. He did. She paid without counting the bills. She opened the door and she stepped out onto the sidewalk, and she stood there, both hands on the handle of her suitcase, and she made herself breathe. In the way Patricia, the attorney, had told her to breathe when things became overwhelming. Slowly, from the bottom of the lungs. Because panic was a luxury she could not afford today. The world kept moving around her as though she were a stone in a river. Guests laughed. A child ran across the lawn. A caterer stepped past her without eye contact, balancing a tray of glasses that caught the light as he moved. The music continued. The celebration continued. And Emily stood completely still on the sidewalk outside the home she had spent 9 years paying for, and felt the particular, devastating silence of a person who has just understood something enormous and has not yet decided what to do with it. It was a woman near the entrance who noticed her first. Emily watched it happen, the casual sweep of eyes that snagged and pulled back, the double take, the slow shift of expression from indifference to recognition to something much more complicated. The woman turned to the person beside her and said something low and close. That person turned. Then the next. The whisper moved through the crowd the way whispers always move at gatherings. Fast and electric and impossible to stop. She heard it reach the porch before it reached Donald. Isn't that his wife? The one who went abroad? Donald's head turned slowly, and his eyes found her standing there on the sidewalk with her suitcase and her 9 years and her absolute stillness. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he buried a long time ago that has just walked back into the light. And what moved across his face was not guilt. It was not relief. It was not the grief of a man confronted with the weight of what he had done. It was something colder than all of those things. And Emily recognized it immediately because she had been preparing for exactly this moment for 2 weeks. From the night she first called Patricia. From the morning she booked the one-way flight. From every quiet, deliberate step she had taken since Karen's pause on the phone told her everything she needed to know. She did not look away. She stood her ground on that sidewalk, and she held his gaze, and she let him see that she had come home. Fully, completely, and ready. The music did not stop all at once. It stumbled. The way music does when the people playing it sense that something in the room has shifted but cannot yet identify what. A missed beat, a dropped note, then a trailing off that was somehow louder than the silence it created. Heads turned. Not all at once, but in a wave, following the line of too many gazes all pointing in the same direction. Toward the sidewalk. Toward the woman in the red dress standing absolutely still with a suitcase at her feet and 9 years written across her face. Donald had not moved. He was still standing at the entrance of the porch, and he was still looking at Emily, and the thing on his face had settled now into something she could read clearly from where she stood. She had spent 9 years studying his expressions through a phone screen, learning to read the small shifts that a camera sometimes flattened but never fully erased. She knew his guilt face. She knew his discomfort. She knew the particular way his jaw tightened when he was caught off guard, and the way his eyes went soft when he was genuinely sorry. This was none of those things. What was on Donald's face right now was irritation. Clean, cold, undisguised irritation. The expression of a man whose carefully constructed plan has just been interrupted by a variable he failed to account for. He was not devastated to see her. He was inconvenienced. That was the moment something inside Emily went very quiet and very hard. Not broken, hardened. There is a difference, and she felt it distinctly, like a door closing somewhere deep in her chest with a soft and final click. Diana had followed his gaze. Of course she had. A bride always follows her groom's eyes, especially when something shifts in his posture the way something had shifted in Donald's. She turned and found Emily standing on the sidewalk, and for a long moment the two women simply looked at each other across the yard and the guests and the music that had now gone completely still. Diana was still holding her bouquet. Her fingers had tightened around the stems without her seeming to notice. Whatever Donald had told Diana about his history, about his past, about the marriage he claimed was behind him, Emily could see in an instant that it had not included this. It had not included a woman in a red dress arriving with luggage on the afternoon of the wedding. Diana's face was not the face of a woman who had known and chosen to proceed regardless. It was the face of a woman who had just been handed information that did not fit the story she had been living inside. She was blindsided, completely and genuinely blindsided. And in the middle of everything she was carrying in that moment, Emily registered something unexpected toward this woman in white. Not anger, not jealousy, something that felt painfully and inconveniently very close to recognition. The crowd had arranged itself into the particular stillness of people who know they are witnessing something significant but have not yet been given permission to react. Children had stopped moving. Conversations had dropped away mid-sentence. A caterer stood frozen near the porch steps holding a tray he seemed to have forgotten about entirely. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The footsteps of a woman who has decided. Emily heard them before she saw her, and she had just enough time to prepare her face before Donald's mother came into view, parting the crowd without touching anyone, moving with the straight-backed authority of a woman who has never in her life felt she owed anyone an explanation. She was dressed in deep navy, a string of pearls at her throat, her silver hair pinned back with the kind of precision that announced she had been ready for this day for weeks. She walked toward Emily without hurrying, without hesitating, without any trace of the embarrassment that the situation should, by any reasonable measure, have demanded. She crossed the yard and she stopped 4 feet away, and she looked at Emily the way a person looks at an unexpected invoice, something that has arrived at an inconvenient time and will need to be dealt with efficiently. Her eyes moved to the suitcase, then to Emily's face. Then she drew a small breath and she said it, quietly, almost gently, with the devastating calm of someone delivering a statement they have already rehearsed. "We didn't think you were coming back. Not I'm sorry. Not how are you. Not even the performance of surprise. Just that." A single sentence that contained within it an entire architecture of decisions made without her, conversations held without her, a future built and furnished and celebrated without her. All of it justified by the simple assumption that Emily was gone, and therefore whatever happened next was nobody's fault but her own. Emily stood in the silence that followed, and she felt the weight of every person in that yard pressing against her. Waiting to see if she would cry. Waiting to see if she would scream. Waiting to see what a woman does when she is publicly, casually, and completely erased. She did none of those things. She looked at Donald's mother for one long, steady moment. Then she bent down, picked up her suitcase, straightened her back, and walked through her own front door. Behind her, she heard the murmur begin to rise. She heard Donald's voice say her name for the first time. She heard Diana say something low and urgent that she could not make out. She heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving in different directions, the sound of a celebration collapsing into something nobody had planned for. She did not turn around. She kept walking. Through the entrance hall she had chosen the tile for. Past the console table she had ordered online at midnight. Toward the staircase of the home she had built from the outside for 9 years. And in her bag, against her hip, her phone was already unlocked. Patricia's number already on the screen. Emily's thumb hovering. Not yet, but almost. The moment was coming and she could feel it the way you feel a storm before the first drop falls. She was home, and she was just getting started. She did not go to the master bedroom. She was not ready for whatever was waiting behind that door. Instead she turned left at the top of the stairs and went to the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. The small one, with the white subway tiles she had picked from a catalog and the chrome fixtures she had upgraded because she believed even the rooms nobody used deserved to be done properly. She went in. She turned the lock. She set her bag down on the floor beside the sink. And then she sat on the edge of the tub and she put her face in her hands and she cried. Not loudly. Not the way grief looks in movies, with sound and collapse and the dramatic release of a person who has an audience. This was the other kind. The kind that has no witness. The kind that moves through a person quietly and completely, like water finding its way through a crack in something that was built to hold. Her shoulders moved. Her breath came in careful, controlled increments because some part of her, even now, even here alone in a locked bathroom in her own house, was monitoring herself. Keeping herself from going somewhere she might not come back from quickly enough. She cried for the kitchen table. For the night 9 years ago when they had spread the future out between them and both believed in it with everything they had. She cried for the Tuesday evening phone calls and the careful way she had maintained them, her end of the string pulled taut across thousands of miles for years. She cried for the mortgage statements and the wire transfer confirmations and the appliances delivered to a home she had not cooked a meal in, assembled by strangers in a kitchen that was supposed to be hers. She cried for the version of Donald she had carried in her mind across 9 years, the man at the kitchen table with his sleeves rolled up and his coffee going cold, and for the man she had just seen standing in her yard in a black tuxedo with irritation on his face. Those two men were not the same person. She understood that now with a completeness that left no room for negotiation. She had spent 9 years loving someone who had somewhere along the way stopped deserving it, and she had not known, and that not knowing was its own particular kind of loss. She gave herself 12 minutes. She had decided that before she even sat down. 12 minutes was enough. It had to be enough. When the time was up she stood. She ran the cold water and pressed her wet hands against her face and held them there for a moment, feeling the shock of it move through her. Then she washed her face properly, methodically, the way she did everything. She dried off with the hand towel folded on the rack, her towel, bought by her, hung by someone else, and she stood in front of the mirror and she looked at herself for a long time without looking away. She had seen herself in mirrors in bad moments before, after difficult shifts, after hard phone calls, after the nights abroad when the loneliness got heavy enough to have a physical weight. She knew this face under pressure. She knew what it looked like when she was frightened and what it looked like when she was finished and what it looked like when she had made up her mind about something and was not going to be moved. The woman in the mirror right now was not frightened. She was not finished. She had arrived somewhere past both of those things and into a territory that was quieter and more dangerous than either. She unlocked the door and walked back out. The house had changed in the 30 minutes since she had entered it. The energy was different, flatter, confused, the way a room feels after something has gone wrong at a gathering and nobody is quite sure what the protocol is for continuing. Through the window at the end of the hall she could see the front yard below. The guests were dispersing in clusters, moving toward their cars with the slightly hurried energy of people who want to leave before they are asked to explain their presence. 2 caterers were already breaking down a table near the garden. The gold and white ribbons that had looked so deliberate an hour ago now seemed abandoned, fluttering slightly in the evening air with the awkward quality of decorations that have outlasted the occasion they were meant for. The celebration was over. Something else was beginning. She was halfway down the hall toward the master bedroom when her phone vibrated in her hand. She looked down at the screen. It was her sister Jennifer, who lived 40 minutes away and who had not known Emily was coming home because Emily had not told a single person. The text was short. For words and a question mark that carried the full weight of everything Jennifer was too careful to say directly. Emily, call me now. Then, 3 seconds later, a second message appeared beneath it. And this one made Emily stop walking entirely. Made her stand completely still in the middle of the hallway of her own home with the phone in her hand and something cold beginning to move through her chest. What has Donald been telling people about you? Because what I'm hearing is not good. It's not good at all, Emily. How long have you known? If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. She did not call Jennifer back immediately. She sat on the edge of the guest bed, not the master bedroom, not yet, and she read the messages 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the comforter and sat with her hands in her lap and breathed. In the way Patricia had taught her. Slow and deliberate and from the bottom of the lungs. Because what she was feeling right now required management before it required action. And Emily had not come this far by letting her feelings move faster than her thinking. Then she picked the phone back up and she called her sister. Jennifer answered before the second ring. She had clearly been waiting. The story came out in pieces, the way these things always do. Not in a clean linear sequence but in fragments, each one arriving with the weight of something that had been held for too long. Jennifer had heard things. From their cousin Retha, who had heard from a woman at her church, who had heard from someone in Donald's professional circle. A neighbor had mentioned something at a block association meeting 3 months ago. A friend of Emily's, a woman named Carolyn who had known Emily since college, had tried twice to find a way to bring it up and both times lost her nerve. Emily listened without interrupting. She had learned, over 9 years of nursing, that the most important thing you can do when someone is telling you something difficult is to stay completely still and let it come. The story Donald had been telling was this, that Emily had changed, that somewhere in the first few years abroad, the woman he married had been replaced by someone harder, more ambitious, less interested in the life they had built together. He told people she had stopped calling as regularly, that when she did call, she was distracted, distant, already somewhere else in her mind. He told people he had tried, that he had suggested she come home, that he had raised the possibility of her finding work locally, that he had expressed his needs clearly and been dismissed. He told people that a mutual acquaintance had mentioned seeing Emily at a restaurant abroad with a man, more than once, in the kind of context that left little room for innocent interpretation. He had never confronted her about it directly, he said, because he had not wanted to believe it. Because he was the kind of man who gave his wife the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt became very difficult to carry. And then, finally, reluctantly, after years of patience and prayer and trying, he had accepted what was obvious to everyone around him. Emily was not coming back. Emily had made her choice, and he had to move forward with his life. That was the story, constructed carefully. Distributed slowly through exactly the right channels, church, neighborhood, family, professional circles, so that by the time anyone thought to question it, it had already taken root in too many minds to be easily pulled out. It was not a story told all at once. It was a story tended over time, the way you tend something you want to grow. And it had worked, because it fit a shape that already existed in people's understanding of the world. The ambitious woman who leaves, who prioritizes her career over her family, who goes abroad and discovers a bigger life and quietly outgrows the one she left behind, who changes in ways that cannot be undone. It was a story people already knew how to finish before Donald even reached the ending. Nobody had called Emily to ask if it was true. Not one person. Not Carolyn, who had known her for 20 years. Not their cousin Retha. Not the neighbor. Not a single elder or friend or acquaintance who had watched her grow up and knew her character down to its foundation. They had simply believed the person who was present over the person who was absent. They had handed Donald the authority of proximity and Emily the guilt of distance. As though being far away was itself a form of confession. As though the thousands of miles between her and home were evidence of something she had done rather than something she had sacrificed. Think about that for a moment. Really think about it. When did staying become proof of innocence? When did leaving to work, to provide, to build something real for a family, become something a woman has to defend herself against? Emily had 9 years of wire transfer records that told a different story than the one Donald had been distributing through church groups and neighborhood meetings. 9 years of mortgage payments made on time, every month, from a woman who was supposedly too busy building a new life to remember the old one. 9 years of phone call logs. 9 years of appliance deliveries and business seed transfers and SUV payments. 9 years of a woman doing exactly what she said she would do, from the exact distance she said she would do it from, for the exact reasons she had stated clearly at a kitchen table on a Tuesday night in October. That was the truth. And it was documented. Every single line of it. Emily ended the call with Jennifer and sat in the silence of the guest room and felt something she had not expected to feel in that moment. Not rage. Not grief. Something cleaner and more focused than either. She felt clarity. The specific, steely clarity of a woman who now understands the full size and shape of what has been done to her and has already begun to calculate exactly how to respond. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked down the hall toward the master bedroom, toward whatever waited behind that door, because she needed to see it. She needed to see all of it before she made her next move. She put her hand on the door handle and pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. And what she found stopped her breathing entirely. The room looked like her. That was the first thing she noticed, and it was the cruelest thing about it. The bones of it were still hers. The furniture she had selected piece by piece from a website at midnight, cross-referencing dimensions and reading customer reviews with the same rigor she applied to everything she cared about. The dark wood dresser against the far wall. The upholstered bench at the foot of the bed. The curtains she had found after 3 weeks of searching. A deep ivory with a subtle texture that photographed poorly but looked exactly right in person, which she knew because she had ordered a swatch sample before committing, because she was Emily, because she did not do things carelessly. She had chosen all of it from thousands of miles away, imagining herself standing exactly where she was standing now, and the room had turned out precisely as she had pictured it. Someone else was living in it. She did not move immediately. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes go where they needed to go, slowly and in order, the way you approach something that has the potential to hurt you badly if you move too fast. The bed was made with linens she did not recognize. A different color than the ones she had ordered, softer looking, chosen by someone with different taste and different hands and a different claim to the space. The books on the shelf above the dresser were not her books. The small ceramic dish on the dresser where Emily had always kept her earrings held a different set of earrings, smaller hoops, gold, belonging to someone younger. She made herself walk to the closet. She made herself open the door. Her side was empty, not reorganized, not moved to accommodate a new arrangement. Empty in the way that a space is empty when someone has made a deliberate decision that the person who previously occupied it is not coming back. The rod was bare. The shelf above it was bare. 9 years of her clothing, her shoes, her coats, the green dress she had bought the Christmas before she left and packed at the last minute thinking she would wear it on the flight home someday. All of it gone. In their place, hanging in neat arrangement on her side of the rod, were another woman's clothes. Dresses in soft colors. Blouses still in dry cleaning bags. A row of shoes on the floor below, lined up with the careful precision of someone who had been told this space was hers and had moved into it completely and without reservation. Because she had been told the previous occupant was finished with it. Because she had been told there was no previous occupant worth accounting for. Emily closed the closet door. She turned to the nightstand on her side of the bed. The one where she had always kept her current book, her phone charger, and the small tube of hand cream she used every night before sleep. The book was gone. The charger was gone. The hand cream was gone. In their place, on top of the nightstand, was a framed photograph. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. Donald and Diana, somewhere outdoors, sunlight behind them, both of them smiling with the relaxed ease of two people who have been told the story they are living is a clean one. It was a good photograph. The kind that gets framed because it captures something true about the moment it was taken. Whatever that moment had been, they had both believed in it entirely. Emily walked to the window. Below, the last of the wedding decorations were being loaded into a van by two men in matching shirts, who moved with the brisk indifference of people paid to dismantle things without caring what they were. The gold ribbons were already bundled. The floral arrangements were being laid flat in the back of the vehicle. The yard she had paid to landscape was returning, piece by piece, to something ordinary. She heard Patricia's voice in her head as clearly as if the attorney were standing beside her. "Document everything," Patricia had said, in the measured tone of someone who had seen what happens to women who don't. "Every transfer, every record, every receipt, every piece of paper with your name on it and a dollar amount attached. Do not walk back into that situation without evidence behind you, Emily. Evidence is the only language that cannot be rewritten after the fact." She had listened. She had documented everything. It was all there, organized and backed up and waiting. She turned from the window and her eyes moved to the writing desk in the corner of the room. Her desk. She had bought it at an estate sale the year before she left and carried it up the stairs herself because it was solid wood and heavier than it looked, and she had not wanted anyone else to handle it. She crossed the room and sat down in the chair and opened the center drawer. It was not empty. There was a document inside, several pages folded together with the kind of careful, deliberate neatness that suggests someone placed them there intentionally rather than left them by accident. She picked them up, unfolded them slowly. Read the header at the top of the first page. Then read it again because the first time her mind had simply refused to process it. Her name. Donald's name. A date 11 months ago. And at the bottom of the last page, 2 signature lines. One signed. One completely, utterly blank. The room went very still around her. Her hands did not shake. That surprised her. That her hands were perfectly steady while everything inside her was rearranging itself around a truth so large she could not yet see all its edges. She was looking at divorce papers she had never been shown, filed by a man she was still legally married to, signed by only one of the 2 people whose signatures were required to make them mean anything at all. Donald had not divorced her. He had simply decided she was gone, told the world she was gone, erased every trace of her from the room she had built, and married another woman in the house she had paid for. All while she remained, completely and undeniably, his wife. She set the papers down on the desk in front of her, smoothed them flat with both hands, and sat very still for a long moment, looking at them, understanding with absolute clarity that what she was holding was not just evidence of a betrayal. It was leverage. It was the foundation of everything that came next. It was the document that turned 9 years of quiet sacrifice into something Donald was going to spend a very long time trying to explain to a judge. She reached for her phone. She had just pulled up Patricia's number when she heard it. A soft sound from the hallway, barely audible. The kind of sound a person makes when they have been standing outside a door working up the courage to knock and have finally decided to do it. 3 quiet knocks. Then silence. Then a voice, young and uncertain and stripped of everything the wedding day had dressed it in. "Emily?" A pause. "Please. I need to talk to you." She read the papers a second time. Then a third. Not because she had failed to understand them the first time. Emily understood them perfectly on the first pass. But because she was the kind of woman who did not act on a single reading of anything important. She was the kind of woman who checked and then checked again, who built her conclusions on multiple confirmations rather than first impressions, who had learned through 9 years of nursing that the most dangerous mistakes were the ones made by people who were certain too quickly. But the third reading said exactly what the first 2 had said. There was no alternative interpretation available. There was no version of this document that meant something other than what it plainly meant. Divorce papers. Filed in this state, in this county 11 months ago. Her full legal name on the left. Donald's full legal name on the right. The grounds listed in the careful, bloodless language that legal documents use to describe the end of things that were once full of life. Irreconcilable differences. Abandonment. The language of a man who had constructed a paper record to match the story he had been telling everyone around him. She had abandoned him. She had left. She had chosen something else over this marriage and this home and this man, and here was the paperwork to prove it. Filed quietly and efficiently 11 months ago by an attorney whose name she did not recognize because that attorney had never once contacted her. No letter. No registered mail. No phone call from any legal representative. No court notification of any kind delivered to any address she had ever provided. She had not been served. She had not been contacted. She had not been given the most basic legal courtesy of being informed that her husband of 11 years was attempting to dissolve their marriage through a court system she had been given no opportunity to appear before. And she had not signed. That was the fact that everything else rested on. That signature line at the bottom of the final page, the one with her name printed neatly beneath it and a blank line above where her name should have been written in her own hand. That line was empty. Completely, legally, irrevocably empty. Which meant the divorce was not final. Which meant it was not valid. Which meant that Donald, who had stood in the yard of this house this afternoon in a black tuxedo and exchanged whatever vows he had exchanged with Diana in her white beaded gown, in front of 200 witnesses who had eaten his food and worn his colors and celebrated his new beginning. Donald had done all of that while still being legally, completely, and unambiguously married to Emily. What he had committed this afternoon in front of every one of those witnesses was bigamy. She set the papers down on the desk and placed both hands flat on either side of them and looked at them without speaking. The room was very quiet. Outside the window the last van was pulling away from the curb, the final evidence of the afternoon's celebration disappearing around the corner. Inside the house, somewhere below, she could hear movement, muffled voices, the particular acoustic quality of people having a conversation they do not want to be overheard. She thought about Donald's face when he had seen her on the sidewalk, the irritation, the cold, efficient irritation of a man dealing with an inconvenience. She thought about his mother's voice delivering that sentence without apology. She thought about 9 years of phone calls and wire transfers and mortgage statements and the green dress she had packed at the last minute and never gotten to wear. She thought about Karen's pause on the phone and the attorney she had called the following morning and the folder on her laptop with every document organized and dated and backed up in 2 places. She thought about Patricia, who had told her clearly and without drama exactly what her rights were and exactly what documentation she would need to protect them. Emily had listened to all of it. She had done all of it. Because 9 years of distance had taught her that love without protection was just hope, and hope without evidence was just a feeling, and feelings, however genuine, did not hold up in a court of law the way a 9-year record of wire transfers did. She picked up her phone. Patricia's number was already in her recent calls. She pressed it and raised the phone to her ear and listened to it ring and thought about everything she was going to say. The papers, the unsigned line, the mortgage in her name, the transfers, the wedding that had taken place this afternoon in a house that belonged, legally and financially, to a woman who had never stopped being its owner regardless of whose clothes were hanging in its closet. The call connected. Patricia's voice came through, calm and ready. The voice of a woman who had been expecting this call and had already begun preparing for it. Emily opened her mouth to speak, and then she heard it, from just outside the bedroom door. A sound so quiet she almost missed it. The careful, hesitant sound of someone who has been standing in a hallway working up the courage to knock and has finally, after what must have been several long minutes of standing there alone with their decision, decided to do it. 3 soft knocks, barely audible, then silence, then a voice on the other side of the door, young and frightened and completely stripped of the brightness it had carried earlier in the afternoon when it had belonged to a bride. Emily. A breath. Please, can I come in? There's something I need to tell you. Something I think you need to hear from me directly. Emily lowered the phone slowly from her ear. She looked at the door. Then she looked back down at the unsigned papers on the desk in front of her. Then she stood up, crossed the room, and put her hand on the door handle. Whatever was on the other side of this door was either going to complicate everything or clarify it completely. And Emily, who had not come this far by avoiding difficult things, turned the handle and opened it. Diana looked smaller than she had in the yard. That was the first thing Emily noticed. Out there, in the gold light of the afternoon with her bouquet and her beaded gown and the full ceremonial weight of the day around her, she had looked like a woman at the center of something significant. Here in the doorway of this bedroom, in a reception dress with her makeup tracked down her face and her hands folded in front of her like a child called to account for something she did not fully understand, she looked exactly what she was. Young, frightened, and completely alone in a situation she had not created and could not yet fully map the edges of. Emily stepped back from the door without speaking. An invitation. Diana came in slowly, the way people enter rooms when they are uncertain of their welcome, and stopped near the upholstered bench at the foot of the bed. She looked at it. Emily nodded once. Diana sat down and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the floor for a moment before she looked up. Then she began to talk. And Emily, who had spent 9 years learning to listen without interrupting, let her. Donald had told Diana the divorce was finalized 14 months ago. He had been specific about it. Not vague, not evasive, but detailed in the way that people are detailed when they want you to stop asking questions. He had shown her paperwork. She had looked at it carefully because she was not a careless woman. She said this with a quiet firmness that Emily recognized and respected, and it had appeared legitimate. It had his name on it. It had Emily's name on it. It had what looked like a court stamp and a finalization date and the signature of a judge. She had held that document in her hands, and she had believed it because she had been given no reason not to, and because the man handing it to her had looked her in the eye without flinching. She had given up her apartment in her home city. She had left a job she had held for 4 years, a position she had worked hard to earn, to move here because Donald had told her this was home now, and home was where they were building something together. She had packed everything she owned into a moving truck 7 months ago and driven it to this house and unpacked it into a closet and a nightstand and a life she believed she had entered honestly and with full information. Her family had come to the wedding today from 3 different states. Her mother had cried during the ceremony. Her younger sister had caught the bouquet. Then Diana stopped talking for a moment. She pressed her lips together. She placed one hand flat against her abdomen in the instinctive, unthinking way that women do when they are protecting something they are not yet ready to say out loud. But she said it, quietly and directly, looking at Emily without looking away. She was 4 months pregnant. She had told Donald 8 weeks ago. He had held her face in his hands and told her it was the best news he had ever received, and she had believed that too, because at that point she had believed everything, because the entire architecture of her life for the past 7 months had been built on the foundation of his word, and she had not known the foundation was constructed on sand. The room was very quiet when she finished. Outside the window the street was nearly empty now, the last of the afternoon completely gone, the neighborhood settling into evening as though nothing unusual had happened in it today at all. Diana looked at Emily. Her eyes were red and her face was exhausted and stripped of everything that the day had dressed it in, and what was left underneath was something very simple and very honest. She said it without drama, without accusation, with the plain, clear delivery of a woman who has just finished assembling a puzzle she did not know she was holding and has looked down at the completed picture and recognized what it shows. "I think we've both been lied to." Emily sat with those words for a long moment. She turned them over. She looked at this young woman on the bench at the foot of the bed she had chosen and paid for and never slept in. This woman who was 28 years old and 4 months pregnant and sitting in the wreckage of a story someone else had written for both of them without either of their knowledge or consent. She thought about what it would have cost Diana to walk down that hallway and knock on this door. The courage that quiet knock had required. The decision to come here, to this room, to the woman she had been told was gone, and tell the truth as completely as she knew it. Diana was not her enemy. She understood that now with a certainty that required no deliberation. Diana was not a woman who had knowingly participated in anything done to Emily. She was a second casualty, a younger wound from the same weapon. They were not rivals, and they had never been. They were the 2 women Donald had needed to keep completely separated from each other in order for his construction to stand. Because if they ever compared notes, if they ever sat in the same room and laid their 2 versions of the same story side by side, everything he had built collapsed instantly and completely. They were sitting in the same room right now. Emily looked at the unsigned divorce papers still spread on the writing desk across the room. She looked at her phone on the desk beside them, Patricia's number still pulled up on the screen. The call she had not yet completed still waiting to be made. She thought about what she was now holding in total. 9 years of wire transfer records. A mortgage in her name, current and documented. And signed divorce papers that rendered this afternoon's ceremony not a wedding but a crime. An attorney on standby who specialized in exactly this category of deliberate, calculated marital fraud. And now, sitting 3 feet away from her on a bench in this bedroom, a pregnant woman who had been lied to just as thoroughly and who had just voluntarily walked into this room to say so out loud. Donald had built his entire architecture on the assumption that these 2 women would never speak to each other. That distance and pride and the natural rivalry of their positions would keep them permanently on opposite sides of a story only he controlled. He had calculated wrong. He had underestimated both of them. And that miscalculation, Emily understood with absolute clarity, was the crack that brought the entire structure down. She stood up. She picked up her phone. She looked at Diana, who was watching her with the careful attention of someone who does not yet know what happens next, but has decided to trust the person who seems to. "I need to make a call," Emily said. Her voice was steady and quiet and completely certain. "And when I'm done, I'm going to need you to tell me everything you remember. Every conversation, every document he showed you, every promise he made, every date you can recall. Can you do that?" Diana looked at her for a moment. Then she straightened her back, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and nodded. Emily pressed call. Patricia answered on the second ring. And in the house that Emily had paid for, in the bedroom she had furnished from thousands of miles away, in the marriage that Donald had decided was over without ever asking the woman he had married, Emily began to speak. Calmly, precisely, with 9 years of evidence behind every word. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened, then closed, then footsteps. Donald was in the house. He had no idea what was waiting for him at the top of those stairs. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever sacrificed for someone who did not deserve it, or stayed faithful to a love that was not being returned, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to see what happens when Emily faces Donald with everything she has, subscribe and stay close. The next chapter is coming, and it will be worth the wait.